From WJFF in Jeffersonville, this is Radio Chatskill. I'm Tim Bruno. On today's show, with weeks into the American vaccination effort, and the country is terribly behind schedule, but locally in Pike County, their vaccine distribution is meeting demand. Why? They've been practicing for just such an event for years. We'll speak with Pike County Emergency Management Director for the latest. Plus, Amber Rose Washington grew up in Liberty filled with insecurity and fear. Her own internal gender identity did not match the sex she was assigned at birth. Now she's living authentically and unapologetically. She writes about her life as a transgender woman growing up in the Catskills in a new book. We'll speak with her about her journey and how she hopes to help people overcome long-held sexual, gender-related mythology and ignorance. But first, the news from NPR. Amber Rose Washington is an author, songwriter, musician, producer, public speaker, and advocate for the transgender community. And she's a transgender woman herself. She grew up in Liberty feeling isolated and alone because her own internal gender identity did not match the sex she was assigned at birth. She shares her journey in her new book, Hiding from Myself, My Complicated Rebirth into Womanhood and My Own Skin. Here's our conversation.
I grew up in Liberty, New York, and my given name, was Edward Ambrose Washington. Like the most male name you could possibly come up with. Sounds very English. And I grew up in the 1970s and 80s in Liberty. I'm a graduate of Liberty High School from 1986. And the story really begins when I was about 4 years old. I was doing my prayers with my mom, and I remember her retelling this story to me. We ended with, "And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil, amen." And my mom says, "Can you please give God your own little prayer? Go ahead and tell God your own prayer now." So I kneeled there by my bed, and I said, "God, please fix me by the morning." And my mom was like, "Oh, honey, are you sick?" And she put her hand on my head, and I started crying. And she said she was really distraught over me. And I said, "Mom," and this is in my book, am I a boy and a girl? Because there was this dichotomy happening in my life where I had a sister, Colleen, who, she was able to grow her hair out. She was able to join ballet class at a young age and do all these things that I wanted to do. And I was, getting these basically crew cuts and being treated differently. And I didn't understand why, because my brain was telling me, "You're a little girl." And my body and everybody else, I was a son, a grandson, a nephew. I was all these things to other people that had a boy connotation to it. And at 4 years old, I just didn't know how to articulate that correctly. I didn't know exactly what was wrong or what was different, other than the fact that later in life I learned that everybody, not just people that are transgender, but literally everyone, you, Tim, me, we all know who we are at the age of articulation, which typically runs between the age of 3 and 7 years old. It's just that when you're born congruent meaning you don't even think about who you are. You're Tim Bruno, you're a guy, and everything's cool with that. When you're congruent, it's never reaching your conscious brain. It's always in your subconscious. But when you're incongruent, like myself, it becomes a painfully conscious thought each and every day, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah. Growing up in Liberty and at 4 years old, having that feeling of being incongruent, what was that like?
It was a strange, I don't want to call it a feeling, it was more of an innate sense of self. People oftentimes conflate that, it's a feeling, and that's where a lot of the bias comes from. Science doesn't care about your feelings. Well, actually, science has proven that, we have a true medical issue that happened during gestation in the second trimester of all times. But growing up, as a little kid in Sullivan County, where I used to say to my friends, there's more deer than there are people here, back in the 70s and 80s. And it was like our little joke amongst friends. And what I found was, as I entered my school years, by the time I was 5, I was basically 90% deaf. So here I was, an incongruent child. I couldn't hear the teacher. I couldn't hear anybody in kindergarten because I was basically deaf. And I didn't regain my hearing until I was about 6 years old, through a couple of operations in the Children's Hospital in New York. And I started struggling at that point because now I could hear. And I would always go into, back in the day, you would have a boys' line and a girls' line, and you'd all hold hands and walk to the cafeteria or the fire drill together. And I would always line up in the girls' line, not on purpose. It's just that's where I would go. And the teacher would always drag me over to the boys' line, as if I was doing something wrong and she thought I was being a smart aleck or something. And things got, a little bit more and more as time went on difficult for me because I started realizing that even though gender identity and sexual orientation are different, at a young age, we all know if we're attracted to boys or girls. Like when we see a movie, like for me back in the day, it was Grease. All the boys at my age, they loved Olivia Newton-John, right? And so did I, quite frankly, but I actually liked John Travolta a lot more. And what I found was that I liked Olivia Newton-John because I would say to my friends and get teased all the time, I love the summer dresses that she wears, and she has these cute ribbons in her hair all the time, like things boys never pick up on, right? Mm-hmm. I love the ribbons in her hair in each of the scenes, how they were different and this and that. And the boys are like, what are you talking about? So my role models were actually not boy role models. It was funny because a lot of my friends back in the 70s and 80s, the role models were actually people that were, movie stars and sports figures like Greg Nettles and Bucky Dent of the New York Yankees, or even, ironically, Bruce Jenner. That was one of their role models. And ironically, we see, obviously Bruce transitioning, several years ago. And, so growing up and going through school and knowing that you're not the same as everyone else, and for some reason you're stuck as this boy, but you're not. It's hard to tell people because you don't know how to say it when you're that age.
Yeah.
So I just said it the best I could. I said, I don't feel comfortable like this. And I only said it to a couple very close friends at the time. And by the time I was a teenager, I was starting to see my girlfriends go through puberty, and I was like, well, why isn't this happening for me? Remember, there was no internet. So my knowledge of sexuality and of gender and of all things universal was very small. I came from a very small town, and there wasn't much information on, especially topics like this. So when I started to see them go through puberty, it really created what we now call gender dysphoria, a lot of discomfort. Gender dysphoria, which a lot of people mess up, is not a mental illness per se. It's basically in the same line as someone that has anxiety or depression. And there's over 65 million Americans that suffer from those two things. Gender dysphoria runs from a 0 to a 10 of comfort level. Mine, was usually around the midline. It was never really tragically bad until the age of 14. I would get picked on and bullied, not because they knew I was transgender, because that was not a word back then. I was picked on and bullied because I was just different. I was like, I guess you call it the runt of the pack. I was not the, alpha male sort of thing that the boys were looking for. But yet they still wanted to be friends with me. It was sort of a strange dichotomy of worlds where I'd get bullied and teased, but we're still friends, right? It was that sort of thing.
As you grew up in the area, established yourself in working in the area, did you find a way to express this sense of your real gender identity, or did you hide that because of all of the bullying and the atmosphere that you described?
Well, yeah, the name of my book is actually called Hiding from Myself, and it stems from the first person that I actually had feelings for in my life was a local boy who I had a relationship with, and he basically beat me up one day, and I said, you know what, this is crazy. I can't keep going through this. You know, I get these little attacks of bullying once in a while, but now it's getting dangerous. And at that point in my life, that very day at school, I decided that I'm just going to go with the flow. I'm going to make myself like girls, and I'm going to be one of the guys. I'm just going to do my best to be one of the guys. And it was horrific. They were talking about carburetors and shotguns, and I had no reference point as to have a conversation with these guys. All my friends were girls, and I felt much more confident and strong speaking with them about the emotional things we would speak about. So I ended up assimilating, we call it. I assimilated and conformed to the society. And the way I laid it out was, we saw the movie Avatar. I'm sure you saw the movie Avatar. Am I correct?
Yeah.
So it was like I was living in I was this remote person living in this avatar, and it felt completely unnatural. Here I was trying to be this person that everybody thought I should be. There's a great quote by a guy named Di Manuel that says, I wish I had the life that was true to myself and not the life that was expected of me. And it's so true, because I was living the life that everyone expected me to live instead of the natural life that I'd been given, because my brain and my body were not aligned. I didn't see the world like everyone else, but yet I was trying to be like everyone else. And it was like realizing I was switched at birth, but instead of being given to the wrong family, I was somehow given to the wrong body. And that totally made sense to me. So I went on, I got into music, I got into computers, and I reclused to my bedroom, and I would write music and teach myself computers each and every day. And I sort of shied away from the things that would make me not feel so good. And by the age of 14, I was already writing music, I was already doing computer programs, and I was already, instead of saying, Mom, I'm going to play football with the boys, I would grab my library card and head down to Main Street and go to that Liberty Public Library and started reading up on this new word that I found from the Phil Donahue show, which was a word that I didn't understand called transsexual. And this woman that came on, she was nicknamed Tula. She came on, she's from Britain, and she was the Bond girl from For Your Eyes Only. And she was a transgender model from the UK, and nobody was aware of it. And it was the first person in my life that I actually identified with. I said, oh my God, I'm not the only person in the world that's like this. There's actually someone else like this. So I went digging through that library for that word. And then I would find the word, and then I would find words associated with it, which led me to learning about the endocrine system. And here I am, this C-plus student at best in school. And here I am learning about the endocrine system of the human body. And I did that for a number of years until I figured out that, well, if I can work at Carlin's Dairy, which a lot of people in Liberty probably remember, I worked on Carlin's Dairy over in Ferndale, milking cows for a couple of years, and amassed quite an amount of money. And by the age of 16, I was ready to run away to Bangkok, Thailand, that I learned from the Liberty Public Library, to go and have a sex change, because that's what I had to do. And then I found out you needed something called a passport, and I had no idea what a passport was back then. So I could just imagine the conversation, after the librarian told me what I had to do. Hi, Mom, Dad. I'd like you to get me a passport. Well, why do you need a passport, dear? Because I'd like to run away from home and go to Bangkok, Thailand, and have a sex change. I don't think that would have went over so well.
Maybe not.
Even though my mom was the first person I told when I was 4 years old, and God bless her, she's in heaven now, but she protected me my whole life. Talk about a parent that has unconditional love for their child. My mom and my dad are beautiful people, and while they may not have understood what this was, my mom especially protected me because she knew there was something going on. She just didn't know quite what it was. She thought maybe it was a phase. But as we all know, so I went and I got a job at the college, and at the same time I got introduced to the music business and happened to haphazardly run into a woman named Ann Ruckert in New York City at a show I was doing. And she starts talking to me, me coming from the Borscht Belt. I had to get my bagel. I had to get my bagel and coffee from the table. So there I was, getting my bagel for the morning. And she walked up to me, this older woman, and started this conversation. Oh, you're from the Catskills. That's wonderful. Where? I said, Liberty. She goes, oh, Crow Singers. Now, this is in the Hilton in New York City. And this woman I don't know is talking about Crow Singers and how, our whole area was the basis for the movie Dirty Dancing. And she really took to me, and we had this wonderful half-hour conversation. She saw all my stuff in my hands, all the songs I had written and wanted to give to producers that day. She said, I'll tell you what I'll do for you, sweetheart. Give me one of your packets, and whether I like it or not, I will call you on Monday. Would that be okay with you? And I just looked back at her, and I was wondering, why am I going to waste one of my packets on this person?
Oh, really?
And I said, okay, I don't want to hurt her feelings, so I gave it to her. And then a few minutes later, a woman walked up behind her and tapped her on the shoulder and said, Ann, your keynote speech is in 5 minutes. We got to get moving. So I went and took my seat, and the guy next to me elbowed me and said, how did you get Ann Ruckert to take your press kit? I said, who? Ann Ruckert, you just gave her your press kit. I said, no, she asked me. And he said, you're the luckiest person here. And at that point, someone from ASCAP gets up on the big stage and says, this person certainly needs no introduction, but for me, she obviously did. She's the vice president of the Grammy Awards, and she sits on the board of directors for that. She started the American Jazz Foundation. She's worked with the likes of Barbra Streisand, Aretha Franklin, Quincy Jones, Michael Jackson, Madonna, Sting, and starts naming all these people. My jaw just dropped.
Oh, wow.
And it turns out she was like the person to give your stuff to. And she did call me on Monday, and she liked my music, and that ended up getting me in the door of the music business.
We're speaking with Amber Rose Washington, who grew up here in Sullivan County. She struggled with gender identity and writes about it in her book, Hiding from Myself, My Complicated Rebirth into Womanhood and My Own Skin. More information at amberrosewashington.com. We'll take a short break and continue our conversation. This is Radio Chatskill.
I'm Jason Dole. In 2020, I spoke with health experts, business owners, teachers, artists, protesters, elected leaders, and so many others. Nearly 600 interviews since the start of the pandemic. And if you listen to any of them, thank you so much. This year, we're going to keep having these conversations that you rely on. So please join me for the local edition. Community news for the Catskills and Northeast Pennsylvania every weeknight at 6:30 here on Radio Catskill.
If you're just joining us, we're talking to Amber Rose Washington, the author of the book Hiding from Myself, My Complicated Rebirth into Womanhood and My Own Skin. After that chance encounter, you went on to work in the music business, work in Hollywood. When did you come out?
I came out in several ways. When I was 14, going on 36, I used to say, I came out to this boy that I was attracted to and said, I'm not gay. And he says, you're not gay. I said, no, I'm not gay. And then I told him, I said, I really messed things up when I came out of my mom. I'm supposed to be a girl, but I'm somehow something happened, and here I am standing before you looking like a boy. And, oddly enough, he was okay with that.
And that was in high school?
That was in high school, yeah. And not a single soul in high school knew what was going on. So I've been in contact with him, and he's such a sweetheart. And of course, he is gay. But he took to me. But he understood that I was not gay, and that was a big problem for a lot of people. When I would come out, they would be like, "Oh, so you're gay?" No, I'm actually identify as a heterosexual woman, because that's what my brain tells me. And no, it's not a mental issue, because I've gone to enough doctors and physicians and endocrinologists and neurologists and psychologists to know the difference. I started telling people slowly. The first person in the music business, I'm going to leave that person's name quiet for now, but all I can say is that I did a stint in New York, Nashville, and Hollywood. And one of those people was a very well-known, way up there, sort of superstar. And this person told me they were pansexual, and I had no idea what that even means. And I ended up finding out from this person it means they're able to fall in love with anyone, whether they're straight, whether they're gay, whether they're, what we call cisgender, which is cisgender meaning on the same side of, which means congruent. Someone like yourself that is congruent in your body. You're a guy, you know it, you're okay with it. And someone that can also be attracted to transgender person. And when she said this to me, I thought it was just the most amazing thing, that she would say that. And she said, "So what's your secret?" And I said, I'm incongruent. And in front of a bar full of famous people, some of the famous people that were in the bar that night were Billy Ray Cyrus, Dan Beard from the Georgia Satellites, and a few other people that I had been sitting at the table with that night. And I was so mortified because I didn't tell those people yet, but yet she's screaming it out to everybody. And then, of course, as I got older, there were more and more people within the music business that knew who I was. I would select the ones that I would trust with this information, because I didn't know how to come out properly, because people that are gay, they come out of the closet. We've all heard that term. People that are like me, we're not even in a closet. We're in the deep, dark, dank basement. It's a whole different experience for us, and a lot more traumatic, because people in our society, unfortunately, it's built into our DNA. We judge a book by its cover. We profile. So if you see someone that looks like a guy, it's a guy. But we've learned since then, and thank God. And you know what? A lot of my fears were irrational, because 99% of the people in Sullivan County that I came out to, and that's several hundred people, by the way, they were all sweethearts. Someone would say, "Yeah, we always kind of knew. We kind of had bets. Like, is she going to stay in the closet the rest of her life, or is she going to actually come out in one of these days?" And they would take bets. No, she's going to the grave with it. They would even gender me correctly. She. And I always thought, maybe Sullivan County's not the place to come out, because we didn't have a whole lot of people that I saw around the area that were like me. As I learned now, there were several people like me that have since come out. The long and short of it is that I ended up coming out to a great number of people in Liberty. It was the people in the music industry first, and then it became people in Liberty that I grew up with, and they were all just beautiful to me. And I love each one of you if you're listening. You guys have been remarkable to me and so supportive for something that most people don't even understand, because there's so many misinformation campaigns out there and what I call mythology about transgender people. Oh, you have a fetish, or you're a pervert. No, nothing like that. And they would say other things like, you obviously, have a mental issue, and you need to seek therapy, not realizing that I had sought therapy before I was even out of college up there. And I was actually teaching the therapists who I was, because they didn't even understand back then. The diversity of the human condition is so much more diverse than we think. We tend to think in a binary, on-off, black and white sort of mechanism, whereas, gender and sexuality, as we've learned, is really running on a spectrum. There's been so much misinformation, and it came from many different circles. One of them was the political realm, and the other was, unfortunately and sadly, the religious realm. And that's sad, because I think religion's important. I think spirituality is important. I'm a very spiritual woman. I embrace God. People said, "Oh, you must be angry with religion." Yeah, I guess I am. But there's a lot of people within those religious circles that are very kind and understand and actually take the time to realize that what they're following is not reality. That the picture's a lot bigger than they're being taught. And what made me write my book, to be honest, was the timing of my book coincided with Donald Trump getting in office. And as you can see, there's a lot of discourse in the country, and we're a very divided country right now. And, of course, the events of the other day in Washington, D.C., which are just so sad and terrible and disgusting. This is a man that most people don't realize that for 4 years was transfixed on doing things to the transgender community to make our lives difficult. Everybody hears about, the transgender ban in the military. Transgender people have always been in the military. I have several friends that are decorated soldiers and officers in the military that are transgender, that have served in Afghanistan, that have protected our country. But they made this ridiculous argument that they're going to cost us too much money because they're going to want to, have their surgeries and hormones given to them in the military and blah, blah, blah. And I said, this is silly. And then, of course, Ben Carson came out and said, we are going to stop transgender people that are homeless from entering homeless shelters. It had a devastating effect on homeless people, because transgender people in our society, since we're so marginalized, have difficulty finding employment. A lot of them lose their families. They lose everything in their life because people simply don't want to understand. And because of that, they're left rather destitute. And Ben Carson took away one of the last remaining lifelines to these people, which was to give them shelter. Instead, they decided to say things, and you can hear him say this on TV. They're a bunch of bearded men with dresses, very derogatory, and not even the same universe of reality of what we really are. A transgender woman is a woman. Our brains are formed physically just like any other woman. Our bodies just are opposite of that.
Do you feel that the new administration will help restore some of the perception and rights for the transgender community?
I think that's a very interesting question, and thank you for asking that, because there's a lot of people that thought that was going to be a problem. But if we look at history, when Obama was president, Joe Biden was the vice president of the United States, and he actually got Barack Obama in line with marriage equality. So Joe Biden has already come out and said, to all of you that are transgender, I have your back. And we are going to undo, all of these 4 years of destruction that he has done to your population. And we're going to do that within our first 100 days. But he actually took the word transgender off of every federal website and he retracted it out of every federal document as well. And it was really kind of disheartening to see that, and that's where the whole "we will not be erased" came from. So, if you've ever heard of, the pride events that happen all over the country, I attended my first one in 2018, with an avid Trump supporter by my side because I told him and explained to him exactly who I was. And he actually shifted his whole political paradigm based on actually knowing me for several years and knowing who I was. And he said, you know what, Amber, I'm going to march with you side by side in that parade. And it was in St. Petersburg, Florida. And there was 250,000 people lining the streets, all yelling in unison, "We love you." And it was so emotional and so wonderful to feel that kind of love coming from people and to realize that we're finally getting people to understand that there's these people out there that want to keep on spreading misinformation and lies about who we are. And then there's all these other people, which outnumber them 2 to 1 easily, that have this mindset of, we love you and we do understand. And we think it's courageous that you have to go through this struggle your whole life and wait so long, because I did wait a long time before I amounted or amassed the courage to come out, because I was known by so many people in different circles. I was really afraid. I was afraid of being bullied again. I was afraid of becoming a statistic, because the homicide level for people that are transgender is outrageous. People have this hatred, and it's a weird thing to witness, people being so angry over the way someone was born. It just makes no sense to me, but it's the reality we live in. Mm. So it took, honest to God, believe it or not, it took Donald Trump doing what he did to give me the courage to say, you know what, if I don't do this now, I'm never going to do this. So I waited until I was 48 years old. People that are my age come out later in life because we have other commitments. And I came out and I said, I'm not just going to come out to my friends in Liberty and Sullivan County and in Hollywood and in New York, in Nashville. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to come out to the whole world. I'm going to write this memoir. And one of the first people I approached when I wrote the memoir was someone named Colin Mockery from the TV show Whose Line Is It Anyway? And his daughter was turning 28, and she's transgender, just like me. And he wrote a piece on Facebook and congratulated his daughter, saying how proud he was of her and happy birthday. And literally thousands upon thousands of people, signed and said, congratulations, Kinley, we love you, and, God bless your future. And it was just so wonderful to see so many people, from different parts of the country and Canada, where he's from, just embedding themselves in this conversation so beautifully. And then 8 to 10 people came in and started saying the most vile words I've ever heard any human being say to another. And I was just so disgusted, and I immediately went into action and not only reported those accounts to Facebook, but gave them a lesson, a stern lesson on how to conduct themselves in a public space like this and on someone's private timeline nonetheless. And a few days later, Colin Mockery was interviewed by People magazine, and he actually wrote some of the quotes I put on that Facebook page to help his daughter. So I called him up and said, thank you. You didn't need to do that. And then he got kind of upset. He said, don't ever thank me. I should be thanking you. More people need to stand up for each other. And you stood up and did the right thing with these other girls that, it was me and a few other of us that actually leaned into these people and got rid of them. Because it's disheartening. Each time we're misgendered, we're discriminated against, persecuted, repressed, profiled, bullied, verbally assaulted, physically assaulted, threatened with death, and in the worst case, actually, had an act of homicide committed on one of us. Those are the things we deal with on a daily basis from a select few in society. And it doesn't take many of those people to create a problem. We just want to live our life as congruent as we can. We all know that we'll never be 100% where we were supposed to be when we, were birthed. But we're just simply trying to be as congruent as humanly possible. Some of us do a better job than others. I like to call myself, it's a kind of funny thing, but I'm a testosterone survivor. That's what I call myself. It's a funny, I should trademark that, I guess. I don't know. But it's true, because what we have to endure as adults transitioning is some of the most painful procedures that anyone could go through. They are so painful, not only physically, but even emotionally painful, because there's so many layers to this, like an onion. And, we're not pretending. We're often conflated and confused with, people that are drag queens or cross-dressers. We have nothing in common with these people. We are not that. This is not what this is. And in my book, in the tour that's going to ensue later this spring in college universities around the country, is really going to be a feeding mechanism to show not just other people in the LGBT community, but people that are not in the LGBT community, to try to get a sense from just a regular, ordinary person like myself, what it's like to be transgender and what it's not like, and try to squash some of that mythology that just keeps on recycling out there.
I want to thank you for sharing your story with us and sharing your true self to the world with this book. It's Hiding from Myself, My Complicated Rebirth into Womanhood and My Own Skin by Amber Rose Washington. More information at amberrosewashington.com. Amber, thank you for speaking with us today.
Oh, thank you, too. And if you don't mind, if I could just say that I'm so happy for everybody, even in Sullivan County. I've noticed a lot of book sales. You all have driven me up to number 6 on the bestsellers list. And I'm just so flattered and humbled by you all, allowing me to achieve that with this book, because my goal is to have people read this and learn something from it. So, Tim, I thank you so much for having me on your show today.
Thank you, Amber. You stay safe and be well.
Take care.
That's all for this edition of Radio Chatskill. More local talk and information next with Farm